Thank you for joining us today to discuss the early decision application deadline. We'll be discussing what it takes to apply for this deadline, to address common misconceptions about the deadline, and really identify what you can do now to prepare for the application as it opens on September 1st, 2018. All right, so you have two members of the Wisconsin MBA Admissions Team here with you today to answer your questions. My name is Elizabeth Davis, and I'm the Assistant Director of MBA Admissions and Recruitment. My colleague Betsy Kazizak, Director of MBA Admissions and Recruitment, is also here and will present much of the information today. Betsy brings over 10 years of admissions experience to the conversation and is a great resource as you continue your MBA research and application process. All right, so I will now turn the conversation over to Betsy, Director of MBA Admissions and Recruitment.
Everyone to our webinar today. As she mentioned, we're going to be discussing the early decision deadline as a whole. Now, if a school has an early deadline, they may approach this deadline differently. So it's going to be important for you to understand the differences. So for our purposes today, we're just going to focus on the Wisconsin MBA early decision. For our program, the early decision deadline is ideal for candidates who have been considering the MBA for quite some time and know that Wisconsin is either your first choice, your only choice, or maybe your top choice for an MBA program. It will allow you to get a decision on your MBA application sooner rather than later. From the admissions team perspective, the early decision deadline is meant to be definitive. Now, this means that we're not going to be exercising the use of a wait list. What this really means to you is it's going to help you to move forward with really a yes, an admit decision, or a no, deny decision. If admitted, though, you will be required to submit your decision early to secure your place in the class. Just as a point of reference and kind of to remember, you can only apply once per year, meaning that if you apply for the early decision and you're not admitted to the program, you will have to wait until the following fall to reapply. As a reminder, the application for this year will open on September 1st, 2018, and all your supporting materials must be in on or before September 25th. To actually meet the deadline for the early decision. So you are getting a little early notification about the September 25th deadline. Now, there's a lot of information out on the internet about early decision deadlines. And truthfully, each school's approach to the early decision deadline can be very different. Now, you do want to make sure that you understand the subtle differences in each school's early decision deadline and their policies. Again, we're just going to be speaking specifically to the Wisconsin MBA's admissions process and policies for our early decision. And right now, I'm going to begin kind of busting a few of the myths about the early decision deadline. So candidates sometimes think that applying for the early decision means that they are legally required to attend the Wisconsin MBA if they're admitted. So this is not true for us. If you're admitted, you still will need to make a decision to accept or decline your offer of admission. Now, obviously, we hope that you will accept your offer, but the choice will remain yours. Should you accept your offer of admission, we would expect that you withdraw your application from other business schools. Candidates also think that they have a better chance of gaining admission if they apply to the early decision. And, I can understand that thought process, but it's not really accurate. We look to admit competitive applicants regardless of what application deadline they choose to apply to. Only apply if you feel your application is as competitive as it can be. It's not wise to kind of just throw together an application just to hit the early decision deadline. And sometimes candidates believe that applying for the early decision means that they are guaranteed merit-based financial aid. And this too is not true. While there is a larger pool of merit aid available at the early decision deadline, you still need to be a strong candidate for admission in order to receive merit aid. All aspects of your application are considered in this decision, from your undergrad grades to your work experience to your test scores. We look at your essays, what your recommenders say. All of these things factor into us making a merit aid decision. At the end of the day, the early decision application deadline is an opportunity to apply to the Wisconsin MBA program and learn a definitive admissions decision early. And that's it. Now let's understand a little bit about kind of who's best suited for this early application deadline. And what we're going to do next is we're going to just talk about what you should be doing now in order to prepare for an early decision deadline. As we've stated, the application will open on September 1st, and so you'll be able to begin working on the each aspect of the application. You can actually start working on it sooner than September 1, and that's what we're going to cover right now. So let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, and that's standardized testing. And I am kind of joking. I realize not everyone likes this subject, but all candidates are going to need to either take the GMAT or the GRE per the application requirements. If English is not your primary, your first language, you may need to take an English proficiency exam, either the TOEFL or the IELTS. However, if the method of your instruction at your undergrad institution was in English, you may request a waiver of that exam. If you are considering applying for the early decision deadline, I'm going to make some assumptions that you've either already have started studying for the exams that you need to take, or you may have already taken these exams, depending on your study timeline. The goal is to study effectively and really just take the exams once. However, taking any test more than once is very common, and it won't be viewed as negatively on your application. With regards to the standardized tests, you will need to take them before the early decision deadline of September 25th. If you plan to take the GMAT or the GRE after the 25th, your application will be considered incomplete and really rolled into the next deadline once your application is fully complete. Now, over the next few months, you're going to be able to begin working on your resume. So while one template is not necessarily preferred, we do have a resume template on our website under the How to Apply section. In that same section, there is a resume kind of guidelines, best practices that will kind of walk you through what's expected of an MBA level resume. And to let you know, our career management team uses this with our current students. You'll have the opportunity to work on your resume really now is a really good time to start, and so that you'll have enough time to receive edits from people that you trust. Should you and I would suggest that you have multiple people kind of give you feedback on your resume so that you can really kind of put together really the best face of who you are as a professional person. So here are a few things to kind of think about. Your resume is important because it actually tells the story of what you have done professionally, as well as makes the case on how you will make the transition from what you are currently doing to what you want to do after graduation. You want to make sure that you're following general best practices with your resume. Your resume should be one page, and you should be able to use clear action words to describe your roles and responsibilities. You want to use numbers when you can to quantify your impact, and always identify the results of your work. A resume is so much more than just listing your daily tasks, and you should ask yourself, what is the larger impact to your organization, your department, or your team? And you should also ask, why should the admissions team be excited to learn about this part of my role? Doing so will give you a more comprehensive view of your own work. Now the essays, the essay questions are actually going to be released a little bit later on in July for the fall 2019 application. But it doesn't mean that you can't actually start making some headway on this aspect of the application. It's my opinion that you can begin working on the required and the optional essay right now, and here's why. to write a compelling required essay. This is usually going to be about your motivations for attending an MBA, your career goals. You're actually going to want to do some significant self-reflection. You're going to want to ask yourself, why do I want to get an MBA at this point in my career? Why have I chosen this intended specialization? You might ask yourself, what did you do to learn more about your intended specialization? Did you speak with colleagues in that role that you're interested in? Did you connect with current Wisconsin MBA students? Did you talk to maybe the program directors of that specializations or the admissions team? And finally, be prepared to really discuss your career goals and how you're able to make that transition from what you're doing now to what you want to do after graduation. The other essay you probably can start working on is really the optional essay. The optional essay is an opportunity to share any additional information with the admissions team, and that can be good or bad. Most applicants will use this space to address maybe some perceived shortcomings in their application. My best piece of advice is to take an honest look at your candidacy and identify areas of potential improvement. Did you have a gap in your resume? Did you have a challenging semester as an undergrad? This is really the place to talk about it. And you can also talk about positive things. So maybe there was an award that you won or something that you accomplished at work that is really not communicated on your resume. And you can use that space in the optional essay. And again, it is optional. The other essay is what we refer to as a recommended essay. Now, you might not be able to get started on this right now since you don't know the questions, but you can start to think about the benefits of writing it or not. It is going to be a topic-based question, and you're going to have multiple topics that you can choose from. And I'm going to encourage you to really think about writing it. And here's why, because it's really going to allow you to share more information about yourself, and it helps us as the admissions team learn more about who you are as a person. So remember, you will have access to all of these questions at least a month in advance of the application opening up. So you can actually get started on this, right away. So it's not really too late to start thinking about who can speak on your behalf as a recommender. I would encourage you to kind of, again, begin this process now. Time and time again, my colleagues and I are really see missing recommendations as the holdup on an application from being reviewed by the admissions committee because they haven't been submitted. So what you want to do is first start by identifying up to 2 quality recommenders to speak on your behalf. And some of the best recommenders I've read come from candidates' current supervisor or manager. These are people who tend to know your recent work performance and are already evaluating you on your leadership, your teamwork, your drive for results, and other skills at work. Generally speaking, you want to ask someone who knows you and your work well and can really speak honestly about your strengths and areas for improvement. And can evaluate your professionalism and can really discuss your leadership potential. I would recommend that you stay away from people like an undergraduate professor who taught you in class and may only know you from an academic standpoint. Family members, although I'm sure your mom and dad will give you a great recommendation, they're probably not the best people. Your friends or family friends, or people in a leadership position who don't really know you or your work well. Having the president of the company give you a recommendation is not going to impress us unless you have worked directly for that person. We want you to connect with your recommender, preferably probably in person, maybe take them out for coffee so that you can explain kind of your thought process for attending an MBA, and specifically the Wisconsin MBA program. And after sharing this information, do ask if they have the time and are willing to provide you a positive recommendation. You should also understand the recommendation process and some of the requirements. Your recommender will be able to fill out an online form that you're going to be able to submit to them through the application. There are several open-ended questions that they'll need to fill in about you, and some others that they can just sort of kind of check the box. We ask these questions because they're specifically what we're looking for. And it shouldn't take them, much time to complete, but you do want to kind of set a deadline for them and let them know by when you need this to be submitted. So in this case, if you are looking to apply for the September 25th deadline, your recommender is going to need to be able to submit that recommendation form on or before September 25th. So do ask them if they have the time to do this. The time and energy you spend on preparing your recommender for this process will only benefit you once the application is open.
Well, thank you, Betsy, for your expertise in all things application related. And thank you to our attendees for their time and attention. So we're now done with all of our content, and we're going to open up the session for discussion and questions about the early decision deadline. So now, if you wouldn't mind, you can ask a question. You can use that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and then I'll work to share those with Betsy, and I can answer them too.
Well, in the meantime, while people are kind of thinking about their question, I will kind of toss out it's just something on the recommender, because this usually will come up. People don't always feel comfortable with a current supervisor or manager as a recommender, especially with the early decision, because maybe they're not quite ready to tell them that they're thinking about leaving their job. So do think about like a former supervisor or manager. Sometimes clients that you might work with or vendors that you work with who know you in a professional capacity could be a strong recommendation. If you do a lot of volunteer work in your community, and that work, really is at a kind of like a professional-like level, sometimes maybe the executive director might be a good choice because they can see you and how you interact in that role. If you, some people are, they're entrepreneurs and they are their own boss. So again, clients or vendors really kind of come in handy for those of you who are your own boss. And those would be some other alternatives to the recommendation form.
That is a great point. We definitely have that conversation with people quite a bit where they're not ready to tell their employer that they're ready to leave, or it might be something that has consequences that they're just not looking forward to. So please know that we're definitely flexible, and as long as somebody can tell us all the great things about you, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So we must have answered everyone's questions, because there's no questions that I see coming through. So maybe Betsy, I know we talked a little bit about the specialization and how that's kind of a large part of our application, because we are a specialized MBA program. So for people who are trying to better understand maybe a few different specialization options, do you have any recommendations for them as they kind of determine which one is the best fit for their goals?
Yes. Set up a consultation appointment with either Libby or myself. That's kind of what we're here for, is just to help be a sounding board and to talk to you about what are your goals. And there's probably no right or wrong answer, because a lot of people have a lot of different interests. But I would say this: talk to people, ask a lot of questions of people who are kind of doing similar positions to what you see the specialization that you're interested in doing, to kind of gain their perspective. Sometimes I always say process of elimination can be really helpful, because you can look at one and say, oh, that's not really my primary career focus. Do think about the type of job you want immediately after the MBA. And that's really where your specialization is going to be most impactful, because as your career continues to grow and develop 5-10 years down the road, the MBA is really what's going to have the impact. The specialization may not as much, because again, it's really setting you up as kind of a little bit more of an expert or a more knowledgeable person in that particular subject area post MBA.
Yeah, and along those lines, we actually have a question from one of our attendees. So they're wondering, do we need to pick a specialization when applying?
You do. And that's kind of what makes us special. And I realize it sometimes can also be challenging, but why we have you pick your specialization at the time that you apply is that you are actually getting in, you're starting to take your core classes in that first year, but you're also taking a specialized class in your very first semester, so that by the time you leave to do your internship between year 1 and 2, you have anywhere from, 2 to 4 specialized classes already under your belt, plus that general management. And that's why we have you do that, to kind of get that added layer of your functional area in there.
Yeah. So we have another question. It's a great question. It's about actually the MS in finance. So this attendee is just wanting to verify that the MS in finance, is it available for those who attended undergrad at an institution other than UW-Madison?
So it is not. Our MS in Finance program currently is designed for undergraduate students who are looking to do a 4+1 here at UW-Madison. So you could do an MBA, and we have several finance options. One is which is very similar. Our MS in Finance partners very closely with our MBA in applied security analysis. So that would be a nice alternative. Or you could look at the MBA in corporate finance and investment banking.
Great. All right, so we have another really great question. Can I change an intended specialization anytime during the MBA program?
Not really. I really should say the answer is no. What we want to do is, again, because you're taking a specialized course in that first semester, it's going to create more of a hardship on you if you make that change at some other later date. Now that being said, if you were just saying, hey, I applied to the Center for Brand and Product Management, but I'm interested really in the AC Nielsen Center for Marketing Research, that's an easier change that potentially we could make. But that's really why we want to talk to you in advance to help make sure that you're getting into the specialization that is really the best fit for you professionally.
Great. All right, another good question. Can I select my former supervisor who has left the company as my recommender?
Oh, absolutely. Part of the question on the recommendation form is going to be asking kind of the relationship they have to you. So they can explain that they're a former supervisor and that they're at a different company, which is not uncommon, but that when they worked with you at that other organization, they did supervise you. So that's not a problem.
Great. All right. Can you help us understand what are the career prospects for students targeting consulting roles post-MBA?
Well, I'd say they're good. And I think, again, some of it depends on your background and what you're coming in with. So a lot of the consulting companies really value your previous or your prior MBA experience, but then they look at, again, what are you doing with your MBA and what is your specialization and kind of your level of expertise that you can bring in. Because as we hire consultants, we do like to know that they have some knowledge in what they're consulting about. So I think, again, it's one of those, what's your background and kind of where are you going with your specialization? But it's a great field and definitely high in demand.
Yeah. So we have just a few more minutes with you here today. What are your burning questions? What can we help you with? I think we've breezed through some of these questions really quick.
I know. Well, I hope to see everyone's application in the early decision deadline.
I know. This would be great. We're excited to start reading apps again. Okay, we got another question. My last direct manager only managed me for a very short period of time while I worked under my skip manager, my direct manager's manager, for a number of years. Can I ask him to write my recommendation?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Again, you're talking, what you're wanting to do is find the person who really has been able to evaluate your performance, whether it was they directly supervised you or there was a little bit of a layer in between, but they saw you, on a regular basis and knew what your teamwork is like, your leadership is like, your performance on the job, and that is really what's most important. And so even if they're not, your immediate supervisor, that's okay.
So, Betsy, I have a question for you. I know I get this
Yes.
question sometimes. Prospective students have asked me, what does an alumni's perspective, how does the alumni perspective play in the recommendation? Some people are wondering if they should try to seek out alums that are maybe within their company to be the recommender. Can you just comment on that briefly?
Yeah. So no, I don't think you have to seek out an alum, because an alum, although it's great to hear from them, unless they supervised you, again, they may struggle with trying to really honestly answer the questions. Um, so for our application, and we probably didn't make this clear, we only actually require one recommendation. And we always say the one recommendation should at least be a professional recommendation. And that's kind of why we stress like supervisors and managers, whether they're current or former, because they know performance and they can speak to a lot of the questions that we're asking on the form. If you want to submit a second recommendation, that's optional and you can. And if you do work with an alum and they're more of a colleague and they still know you, but they just know you in a different capacity, I think that's fine. It's not necessarily going to carry any more weight than anybody else, but that could be a nice second recommendation.
Great. All right. We have a attendee who's wondering, can I submit my IELTS or TOEFL score after the deadline?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and this is actually going to apply to a lot of different things. So the answer is, well, it's no if you want to be considered for that particular deadline, and yes if you are okay with being moved on to the next available deadline. So this is one thing that, again, I think we kind of touched on it with like the recommenders, but our application has certain pieces that we refer to as supporting documents. So when you submit your application, that's one piece. You're going to submit a test score, whether it's a GMAT score or a GRE score. That's another supporting material that's required. Your essays are a supporting material and they're required. Your resume is another supporting material. Your recommender is another supporting material. Your transcripts are another supporting material. All of those things must be submitted on or before the deadline in which you intend to apply. If it comes in after the fact, your application is considered incomplete, and we just wait for you to submit the missing pieces, and then whatever is the next available deadline is when we kind of will plug you in for a review. And we do that because we try to manage those who are complete on or before the deadline. We want to give our full attention to you guys first and read your applications, do the review, take it to the admissions committee before we move on to the next deadline. So it is important to get all supporting materials in on or before the deadline in which you are planning on applying. And as I mentioned, please don't rush your application just to hit a deadline. There is no advantage of one deadline over the other. The early deadline is really meant for people who have been kind of thinking about this for a while, have a lot of their supporting material kind of already, like their test may be taken, and they just want that, I want an early decision because I want to know yes or no about Wisconsin. But if you're not at that point, just wait and do the November deadline. And January, to be honest with you, is probably our most popular deadline. So it's when we tend to see the most applications.
Definitely. All right, we have lots of questions now.
Okay.
All right, so how important would you consider years of work experience in our application? I noticed the average years of work experience was 5.
Yeah, so it is important to have some work experience before you come back to do our MBA. 5 is an average, but there are people above it and people that are below it. And I think you just have to look at your own kind of personal circumstances, where you are in your career, what you've been doing, and apply when you feel like you're ready. But it is good to have some experiences to kind of be able to tap into. And a lot of times it can also help you when you pick your career specialization to kind of know what you like and what you don't like in your career.
Definitely. All right. If if my TOEFL score doesn't meet the minimum requirement before the early decision deadline, can I still submit my application and provide you with my plan to improve my TOEFL score in an optional essay? Excuse me.
So I'm going to advise you not to apply for the early decision deadline then. and these are the reasons why. Again, it's a definitive deadline. So we have to make a yes/no decision. If you have a piece of your application that you don't feel is quite as competitive as it should be, just take your time and apply for the next deadline. And then submit what you feel is the most competitive application that you can provide. Otherwise, what we end up having to do is we'll read your optional essay, we'll realize that you're taking it after the deadline, we'll still look at it as though it's like an incomplete application because you don't want us to make a decision until you get that new piece in. And it's not fair for us to have to kind of hold off on making that decision when we're also promising you when we're going to provide you an answer. So again, take your time and don't submit until you feel your application is really at the level that you want it to be at.
Great. Okay, you mentioned that we could ask someone from our volunteer community to write a recommendation. I worked with the volunteer community of the employer I worked with. Can I ask the head of that team to write a recommendation? I worked directly with CSR head for a couple of projects.
Again, yeah, I mean, I think that should be fine. You have to evaluate, does that person know you on a professional level? Do they know how you perform in team situations? Do they know how you perform under stress? Do they know how you perform as a leader? If you feel they do and they can really address it, yeah, by all means, ask them to be your recommender.
Great. I'm appearing for PMP, a professional certification, during October 2018 from my current company. Will you consider this once the deadline has passed?
So if maybe I'm not fully understanding the question. So you're getting a professional certification, but you're actually going to probably, it sounds like maybe sit for an exam or actually get the qualification in October. Yeah, you can always, send us an email that you can add that to your application.
Or add it to your resume. And
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a good spot for it, is on your resume.
Yeah. Sometimes we have people in this situation exactly where they're like, hey, I've got this certification or I'm having this change. I'd like to be able to add this to my application and unless it's something very out of the blue or something we haven't seen before, I mean, typically we're happy to add that to the application. So
yeah, you could put that anticipated completion date, October 2018.
Or you could mention in the optional essay too. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can let us know. All right. Well, that's all of our questions, and we're a little bit over for time, and we want to be respectful of all of you and all the things that you have going on as well. So with that, we just want to say thank you. Thanks for your time and your attention, and we hope this presentation was helpful and helped you better understand the application process and requirements, more specifically to the early decision deadline. But should you have any further questions, or if you're thinking about things and you're like, oh, I wish I would have asked this while we had that live Q&A, just feel free to reach out to the admissions team at mba@wsb.wisc.edu. We really are here to help you navigate this process, and we're eager to help you put your best foot forward. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.